Clark Poppleton, this is great. We are at the Kappa Theater in the Robert H. Jackson Center. And this is not your first time you've been here.
No, it is not. When I came in, the gentleman asked me if I needed help finding the auditorium. I said, no, I think I can get there.
I mean, you spent some serious time here.
Yeah, when the time I was a little boy, yeah.
And that kind of there was a live and good connection here, right? Mm-hmm. So tell me about that.
Well, my grandfather was Donald R. Livengood, who was the secretary-treasurer of the Scottish Rite, and his office was right in the front of the building. And we lived across the street, 310 East 4th Street, and that's where I was raised. So I was raised by my grandparents. And so I had an awful lot of time to spend over here, and it was a great resource for me because it was such a big building. I just wandered throughout this whole place, and there used to be pool tables here, and I don't know if they still are or not. But it was a great place for a little boy to hang out, and I used to mow the lawns as a teenager. So I spent a lot of time in this building. I remember, here's an interesting story. I'll never forget the day I realized that my Santa Claus was my grandfather. And I was trying to go to sleep. It was Christmas Eve, and I heard him go out the door. And I got up and I looked out, and he was walking across the street to come into the building over here. I thought, what's he doing? This is, late at night. Next thing I see him walking out with a bunch of packages. And he had hidden them. He hid all the Christmas presents over here, and he was bringing them back. And that's when I knew that Santa Claus didn't exist anymore.
So when you entered this building, did you enter it when you were a kid, did it come off 4th Street, or did you come in off Prendergast? How did you walk me through when you were a kid?
In the front door, or side door, either or. Oh, and the back door was where the lawnmowers were and stuff.
Oh, okay.
So, yeah, and in the early days there were dinners over here. We used to come over here for those dinners they had down in the basement. It was a big kitchen. Right. They're fundraising dinners. Just a lot of activity over here. I remember when my grandfather and a bunch of the guys built the howdah. You remember the howdah for the Shrine Club?
Yes.
That old Jeep that they turned into the howdah. For the parades, a bunch of guys. That was parked in the drive over here for a long time. I was involved with my grandfather in the development of the Den Elsman's Club.
Sure.
And we cleared a lot of land and helped get it started up there. He was very instrumental in getting that started, and so I was always a tag along, and it was a great place for me to go for a young boy to hang out in the woods and with all the old guys. It was great.
Where was the pool table? Is it down in the basement?
No, second floor. Actually, it was 2 stories. There was a big Brunswick pool table on the second floor, and then there's another 3rd store that they had 2 or 3 other pool tables, billiards tables, on the 3rd floor. So there were a bunch of them. All the beautiful old wooden, Brunswick tables. It was great.
The 3rd floor, as I recall, you went up kind of into the old apartments, and then they went up, and we have a library up there now, but it's that's where I can't even imagine how they got a pool table up there.
I don't either. I don't know how they did, but it was great going up there and playing pool.
Did they have dances here? Did they have social?
I don't remember dances so much, but I do remember a lot of programs for kids. As a matter of fact, another side of my family, the Poppleton side, my grandfather he actually owned the Red and White grocery store in Lakewood, but he was also a magician. And he would come and do shows around the area, and he, as a matter of fact, was doing a show here when he actually had a heart attack and passed, but it was right here in this building right behind me, on the stage.
Do you remember the fire in this place?
I do. Yeah.
Tell me about that.
Well, it's a long, sad story because I think it was started through the back where the lawnmowers were or something, as I recall, because the police contacted me because I had access to the tool shed, the hardware shed, and they wanted to know if I had anything to do with it. I said, my God, no, why would I do anything like that? But come to find out, it apparently were some kids who knew me and knew that I mowed the lawn here or something, who actually got in and I think tried to rob the place first. And I think they started the fire to cover up the robbery or whatever they did. And I think that's the story behind that.
So arson, and it did significant wood damage. You can still see it now. I mean, the wood bubbled up and is all there.
Yep, right out there.
Yeah, this would have been like the 60s, late 60s?
Probably, yeah, because I graduated high school in '65, so early '60s, because I was mowing the lawn then, and it was.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, we talk about that, the fire. In fact, I recently found the file of the fire, insurance claims and stuff like that, which were all part of that. Now, your grandfather, Livengood, was he involved right up to the end? Was he as the Masons?
Well, let's see, I'm trying to remember when he retired. I can't remember the exact date, but he remarried after my grandmother passed away. He remarried Julia Sheldon. And I think he was pretty much retired shortly thereafter that, I think.
Look familiar?
Yes.
That's your grandfather. And here's a letter that we have in our archives. May 14th, 1951, Dear Don, I want to express to you and through you to the Jamestown consistory my profound appreciation of the gift of 33rd degree jewel. 33rd degree in this world is big, huge. It is a work of art and something that I'll always prize, but what I prize most of all is the fine spirit of fellowship that prompted the gift, and that was so evident at the meeting. Both you and Sam Bowers made me feel that I was quite important for a few minutes. It was a fine honor to give the class bear my name, and the quality of the class made the honor even greater. Not in years have I met so many old friends, and I appreciated so much the opportunity. With best regards and good wishes, I am sincerely and fraternally, Bob. So this is to your dad, grandfather.
Grandfather, yeah.
Yep. Did he ever talk about Jackson?
Other than just knowing him, he didn't. I don't remember him talking like that because I was pretty young probably at the time. When,
Yeah.
But yeah, I very well much knew that he knew Jackson. Yeah.
Well, anyways, both of these are in a case. Donna, you've seen it before, and, as well as the jewel. And, Livengood all over the place here. Clark Poppleton.
Yeah.
Maybe you can be a docent and give a tour.
Who knows?
The Jackson Center as I know it.
Yeah.
I should probably.
I know the nooks and crannies and the little cubby holes. That's about it.
Yeah, was the bar downstairs? There's a bar in the basement. When you go through the utility room where the furnace is, then you go into an area it's just a cave. But there's a bar. And I just wondered if you were part of the demole or anything that made that.
I don't remember that at all, no. I remember the dirt floor basement and all that, but I don't remember the bar. I remember the cloakroom off the side with all the gear for the ceremonies they had, and the swords and all that stuff.
Yeah.
But I don't remember a bar.
We'll take you down there. The day is still young.
I should remember that, but I don't.
Well, maybe it came a little bit after. But Bill Stevenson, you know Billy Stevenson?
I don't think so.
He's involved in the city stuff, but he was a demole. So he lays claim to somehow they made that. They made a bar in that dirt floor area. It's just still there. It's a huge bar. And apparently Carlton Winchester, among others, said enough's enough because the high school kids would go down there and turn it into their little,
of course,
fraternal organization of their own. So you're a Jamestown guy.
I am.
Graduated 65, you mentioned. And give me a little bit of where'd you go to school? A little autobiography of Clark Poppleton.
Well, I graduated JHS in 1965, and I spent a year at Syracuse right after high school at Syracuse University. That apparently wasn't the right school for me, and they asked me to take a break and come back later. And that was at the height of Vietnam, and so I realized I just don't think I want to stay out of school right now. So I got into Parsons College, and there were a lot of other folks from Jamestown there. Dave Dawson was there. Pete Dawson was there. Jimmy Blanchard. So a lot of guys from Jamestown were there, and it turned out to be a great choice. Great educators, and I, even though I'd lost some credits at Syracuse, I made up the time while I was there and graduated on time. So I graduated in 1969 with a bachelor's in sociology. And then, even though I'd put it off for a while, I got out of college and got home and got drafted shortly thereafter. And so I entered the United States Army in December of 1969. Went to Fort Dix and spent 2 years in the service, and I was trained as a medic and an operating room technician. And I was fortunate not to ever leave the country, and I worked at Fort Bragg at Womack Army Hospital. So I got a lot of medical background from doing that, and it was really a great job, and I learned a lot. From then, I came home, and oddly enough, after being a veteran and a college degree, really couldn't find a job in town at that time. So a friend of mine was moving out west to Tucson, Arizona, and I decided to follow them and some friends of mine, and went out there and got a job the first day I was there at Tucson Medical Center as an operating room tech. And shortly thereafter, I realized, one of the things I had done while I was at home, I worked for the Jefferson Help Center, which is a drug abuse crisis intervention center. And I got to meet some people who were in the vocational rehabilitation program at UB. And I thought, this is pretty interesting, what it requires to become a rehab counselor, because it's psychology, sociology, balanced with medical. I thought, well, I kind of fit that, groove. So when I got to Tucson, I found out that the U of A had a very well-established rehab program. And so I applied and got in the spring of '73, I think. So then I got a master's degree at a 2-year program at the U of A, and I worked for the state of Arizona, Department of Economic Security, and my first job was in Nogales, Arizona, and I was the only rehab counselor there, and I was the only person who didn't speak Spanish at the time, which was very interesting, trying to do counseling with people who didn't speak English. But I learned fairly quickly, and I had a great experience there. And then they transferred me over to Sierra Vista, which is another new office, and I started that office. And had a great experience over there. Spent time, riding around the West, Tombstone and Bisbee and all those places. But I hit 30, hit the age of 30 out there, and I was doing well, had a good time, but it was almost too much of a good thing. I thought, well, I think it's time to go back to my roots and settle down a little bit. And so I decided I better go home. So I did, and I came home, and I got a job with the Health Systems Agency of Western New York, which is a federal health planning organization out of Buffalo. And I became the sub-area planner for Chautauqua County. And so I worked there for 3 years, and this is kind of leading into how I got into the resource center, because as part of my job then was we did the certificate need applications reviews, and I was involved in that process. And during that time, we did not only hospitals, but any other health-related facilities in the resource center had just more applications than anybody else at that time. Things were just really popping with the resource center and Mike Raymond, as we all know. So I did a lot of reviews of the resource center. So I got to know Mike and the operation. Well, after 3 years, the federal funding ran out for the Health Systems Agency. And I realized I better find another job. So I'm thinking, well, I'm still living in Jamestown and traveling back and forth to Buffalo and Salamanca. And so I went to see Mike Raymond, and I think at the time there was an opening. And I knew of the opening because I'd just done the review of the staffing pattern and everything. So we talked about the day treatment program, and he hired me for the day treatment program manager. And that was in 1980. So that's how I got started at the Resource Center.
So you're doing this work, certificate of needs, and the go-go time periods were right at that time period. I mean, 78, 79, 80, Willowbrook Decree, and Mike is working the state like nobody else.
Absolutely.
And what was your sense of him?
He was extraordinary in the sense of he could find money like nobody else. And he was great at establishing relationships. I think he was not only successful because of his entrepreneurial spirit. He was one person I know who I would characterize as having a true entrepreneurial spirit. If it could be done, he'd find a way to do it. And then he was also extremely sociable, as we all know. And he created these relationships in Albany. And he was on a first name, party basis, in effect, with a lot of the, senior officials in Albany that we had to deal with. And I remember going up with him, and we'd go out and have a few drinks with some of these people. And next thing you know, and I'm not saying this is how it all worked, but I'm just saying his relationship, his ability to create relationships with people was instrumental in how successful I think we were in those days. Even though it was the golden age of services to the developmentally disabled, and there was a lot of money coming downstream because of the consent decree and all of that, and the community-based services movement. Michael was instrumental in getting a lot of resource for the Jamestown area that we might not have gotten otherwise.
Describe your job.
My job, jobs
Yeah.
with the Resource Center. Well, as I mentioned, my first job was the day treatment program manager, and it was a new program as well, and it was clearly it was a more intensive program for people who have more severe disabilities, and the Resource Center was beginning to get into that. Historically, the Resource Center started off mostly with group homes and some day programming, but it was more caretaking, but day treatment was in fact more clinically involved because it had PT, OT, speech, and all these other clinical services involved. So that was my first job, and Michael hired me, but the person who was overall the service at that time was Paul Chisana, who was the director of clinical services, and so. I was working directly with Paul over all these other things, and at the same time we were doing the day treatment program. We also put in applications for a mental health program, clinic treatment services, and right in the middle of all of this stuff, Paul leaves to take an executive director job in the Buffalo area. So at the same time, as we have said, Mike was capturing all of these grants for programs, and he got the opportunity to build an intermediate care facility. And this is the same time that they were also building more group homes as well. And Bruce Pietz was over those, and he had hired somebody to start up the ICFs. And I was still doing the clinical stuff. Actually, I became the director of clinical services after Paul left. So in the middle of starting up the ICF on Foote Avenue, which was a huge local project, it was 6 10-bed units, 60 beds, and over 100 staff. I mean, it was a big to-do. And the person he had hired to develop it, in the middle of it, before they even opened, he decided he wasn't happy with that person and let him go. So here he's got, this big operation being developed, people lined up from Perrysburg to come out here, and he lets the guy go, and he comes to me, he says, "Clark, you got to take this job." I said, I don't know if why would I want this job? It would be a nightmare just walking into the middle of this thing. Well, it comes to find out, I was the only one on staff at the time who had the credentials to do it. So I was pretty much his only choice without going outside. And it didn't have any time to do that. I mean, we're in the middle of hiring people and going through all the rigmarole of starting this place. So he gave me 24 hours to make up my mind. And what was I going to do? So I did it. And I have to tell you, at this time, this was in 1982, and my wife had blessed us both with twin boys at the time, February 15th. And we were not sleeping a whole lot, and he asked me to take on this job as opening up the intermediate care facility. And I don't know how I survived, frankly. But we did it. We had a great team, and we just put our nose to the grindstone, and we pulled this thing off. And nobody in the agency was aware of how complicated and how over-regulated these programs were compared to what we had been doing. Well, we found out pretty quick that it was a lot more than we expected. And you had to have a pre-survey before they'd give you the opening. And we didn't do too well the first survey. But again, because I'm just coming into it, not knowing what's going on, trying to get up to speed. And this is a 24/7 operation, so I mean, you couldn't get away from it. It was just going night and day, and just crazy. And we knew we had to either get this thing or it wasn't going to work. And so we just did it. We just did it. And we pulled this thing together, and we passed the survey, and we opened that summer. I think it was maybe April, May of 1982, something like that. Really significant accomplishment for the agency, for the people, and for the community too. And I'll never forget the director at the time was Fred Sasinski. And he came down and I think he gave a speech to the staff and congratulating us. And he even said, he had the audacity to say, "Nobody ever expected you guys would do this." And I said to him, "I'm glad you didn't tell us that, because we didn't know we weren't supposed to." So we did. So anyway, that was the ICF. From that point on, do you want me to keep going on this?
Sure, please. This is fabulous.
So, I mean, there's a lot to it. So the beauty of the ICF movement, the community movement, was that it took people out of institutional settings. And that was the whole point. The beauty of what Geraldo Rivera did in exposing the Willowbrook State School was that the conditions under which those people were living and being treated just was not successful. It was doing more harm than good. And what they realized is community settings truly contributed to their improvement or improved capacity more than anything else. And we saw that happen. Our first phase of taking people into the ICF on Foote Avenue was out of Perrysburg, the developmental center in Perrysburg. And that was an institution as well. I'm not saying it was bad, it's the nature of institutions. And even though people thought ours was an institution, it was still a small, community-based, small units run like small houses. And it was uncanny, the improvement that we saw in the people who came to live with us from the institution. People who couldn't sit at a table and eat a meal soon were doing that regularly without any difficulty. It was unbelievable, the improvement that we saw in those people. So it was motivational for us to keep doing it because we knew it worked. So that said, Mike was contacted. I guess I'm not sure the details how Mike worked his magic, but we were then given the opportunity and applied for a CON to develop more community-based ICFs, smaller, 10, 12, and 15-bed ICFs, to take some of the last remaining folks out of the Willowbrook State School and the New York City area who were covered under the Willowbrook Consent Decree. So we built, at that time, the Chandler facility, Celeron facilities, and at the same time, I think you got some grant money to do more group homes as well. And it was, it was another example of the complexity of developing and operating these types of facilities. The people who were coming out of Willowbrook at that time were the most severely involved, because the people who had left earlier were less severely involved. And so the last William folks were the most difficult. And we made up our mind that, we're going to do this. But we had to go to New York City and screen and these individuals and try to select the people we felt we could help the most. So we got the opportunity to actually visit Willowbrook and take people out of Willowbrook, and I will never forget. It's pretty tough. I will never forget that place, anyway. But we went to other places, too. We went to the Bronx Developmental Center. We went to Flower Fifth Hospital, where these people were located. And that was a hospital. So you can imagine the complexity of the needs of these individuals. But we did it. So we built these homes. I knew I was going to do this. But anyway, we built these homes, and they were actually airlifted here, medical transport, because they couldn't travel any other way. So that was another accomplishment. So anyway, we did this, and some of the complexities we're dealing with, you had to deal with a special master. Rudy Magnoni at the time was the special master of the Willowbrook Consent Decree. And all these people had to approve the whole process. It's not just the state CON process and the state bureaucracy. This was the court-appointed special master, and they had full say over where these people went and how they got there. And then there was another woman, Rita, I can't remember her last name, but she was over the human rights component of serving the Willowbrook class folks. So not only that, there was a Black and Puerto Rican caucus of the city that had to sign off on this because of the nature of the individuals involved. The New York City DDSO had to sign off on it. I mean, the layers of approval and sign off on this were extraordinary. So we were really under the gun to do this thing right. And they would come out here and visit. Make sure that the locations were good, and whatever we were doing was okay with the consent decree. And they not only had to prove it getting them here, but once they got here, they kept coming out to visit and follow up. And if they didn't like something, they let you know in those uncertain terms, and that you had to do this. So it was a really complex, complicated process. But the staff, some of the folks on at that time, Mark Morton, Minette Feinberg, were extraordinary. In putting the staff together, putting the operations together, and we were really proud.
You were bringing in residents that were not Chautauqua County residents. Mm-hmm. Do you get a sense of whether there was pushback from the community?
I remember distinctly some of the pushback from the community. And frankly, I enjoyed, it was, a difficult process, because you had to understand, the syndrome we called NIMBYs, not in my backyard. And we all understood that, we all knew that. But it was our job to try to explain why this was the right thing to do. And I kind of enjoyed that process. And I tried to explain it not only from the human perspective of the whole rationale and why New York State was under this consent decree and why we were doing this, but at the same time, it was good for the community. We were bringing 100 jobs into this community just for the ICF, just for the Foote Avenue ICF. You could double that, if not more, when we brought in the Willowbrook folks. Economically, it was terrific for the community. And not only that, but it was a lot of outside money, state money, Medicaid money, that we wouldn't have had otherwise, and it didn't come out of local pockets. And if the state was going to do this, I figured why don't why don't we get a piece of that as much as anybody else? We're as deserving as anybody else. So I tried to sell it on the economic side. It was good for the community. It was good, clearly, for the people, how they would most definitely improve in their condition from where they had been, because I've seen it and I know how that worked. And it was the right thing to do for the community. So, yeah, there were some folks who didn't really appreciate it, but once we got up and running, 99% of the time, they became our best neighbors.
In the ICF areas, was the Padovan bill helpful to you? I know Padovan dealt with group home setting, dealing with zoning laws. Was that part of your world too?
It was all the same. It was all part of the same
Okay.
stuff, yeah.
So I was trying to recall.
Yeah, we had to, it was a requirement to do the Padovan
Yeah,
hearings.
because I remember going to numerous public hearings as part of the process. During this time period, was Michael, did you see them in kind of a hands-on guy, or was he sort of the 10,000-foot guy looking for the next project?
He was clearly the, dealing from 30,000 feet. He was not a detail guy at all. He loved to make the deal. He loved to get things going, but boy, he handed them off in a hurry. And that was okay. We understood that. It became challenging sometimes. For example, when we were dealing with all this political stuff, I was the point person on a lot of this stuff. And sometimes I'd say, Michael, you gotta sit in on this stuff. This is big stuff, I don't know if I'm speaking for the organization all the time. And he was not a fan of that stuff. He liked to move on to the next project. But other than that, you could get him to do it. But sometimes you had to twist his arm a little bit. But and that's okay. That's how it worked.
Who else was on your team? Sort of the go-to people within your world.
Oh gosh, in-house.
Yeah.
Oh well, over the years, Karen Zillhaver was the first person I worked with. She was the assistant manager of the day treatment. Mark Morton was a huge support throughout my whole tenure, and he just retired a year ago, I think. Mark he was great with everybody. He was really appreciated by staff. He was this very sincere guy, always doing things for the right reasons, and he was terrific. June Ketchum had a big role early on in the Foote Avenue ICF. She's since passed on. Mary Jo Hamilton Bonfiglio, who just retired a few weeks ago. We hired her at Foote Avenue at the ICF. She was terrific. Minette Feinberg, Kathy Seestead, Eric Seestead. I could go on and on. We were blessed by having really good folks. We couldn't have done it otherwise. Because sometimes you just had to jump in and do stuff and get it done. And if you knew what you were facing, you probably wouldn't even want to try it. But that was our team. We just did it.
Foote Avenue, I remember that distinctly because it was a unique setup, land ownership-wise, with Milt Battler.
Dr. Battler, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Who essentially funded a good portion of that. Just to get it. Land contract, he kept title, and you had a long-term lease, which was really unique, but only the way we could really afford it at the time. Did you have much interaction with Milt or subsequently Bruce?
Mostly Bruce.
Yeah.
Milt a little bit early on, but mostly Bruce. Bruce was really his operations manager at the time. Yeah, there were some issues. I think early on, when they started, they had hired a contractor out of Buffalo to build the ICF. And I remember there were a lot of things going on. The fire alarms were going off early on. Do you remember that?
I do.
When we first started to open. And there was a lot of dust. I think it was from the contractors, and there was dust in the fire alarms and everything. But the fire department would, we'd get an alarm up there, and they were there. They were great. But it was quite a number of these things. And finally they said, you guys got to cut this out. we can't keep coming up here like this. You got to get this thing fixed. Well, that was just one of the issues. I mean, we had numerous physical plant issues early on. And I'm trying to call the builder to come back and do all this stuff. Come to find out, he went belly up shortly after finishing the project. So it was a net lease, and we were pretty much on our own after that. I think the only thing that was in the lease was the roof or something like that. So we had quite the time early on getting the building up to speed, but we did. It was like anything else, you know, you just had to go through it. But that's how it works sometimes.
Brew Bar was the name of the organization.
That's right.
Bruce and Barbara.
And Bruce, don't get me wrong, Bruce was really good. Bruce did, you know, he was as helpful as he could be under the terms of the lease, and he was a good friend, and I'm not saying anything negative about it. I enjoyed working with Bruce quite a bit.
The group homes, that was sort of Bruce
That was,
Pitt?
yeah, early on it was Bruce Piatz, and then it was another guy came in, I can't remember his name. You, Steve, remember him?
I don't.
But he ultimately went with Michael to Connecticut.
Tisdale.
No, what Tisdale was one of his. Tisdale was the facilities manager.
Okay.
But the actual program manager was
Okay.
another. I cannot remember his name off the top of my head. But Tisdale was an interesting guy too. He left with Michael to go
Yeah,
to
yeah.
Connecticut. Yeah, both those guys did.
Tom's role was what?
Facilities manager.
Yeah. We had a lot of facilities.
Yes, we did. He came from the Cleveland Clinic.
Really?
Yeah, originally. He was a facilities guy there, supposedly, is what he told us.
Yep, Tom. Funny, it's another name that.
Oh, yeah.
Perhaps. You were there for a long period of time. As it grew, literally at one point had a budget of $100 million.
Yes.
I personally can remember the day we adopted a budget way back when of $1 million. It was like, wow.
Wow, yeah.
So you think about that growth aspect of it. And did you get a sense of the, perhaps an increased acceptance of the resource center as a contributor to the community, economic development engine over time? Did you get a sense of that?
Yeah, I think those who understood and recognized it appreciated it. Not everybody appreciated it, you know. I think some people, you know, got more caught up in the NIMBY syndrome, you know, that kind of stuff. But I think over time, when you have a $100 million company, you realize it's a major contributor to the local economy and local community. I think that also became more plausible when we also developed the Article 28 clinic program. I was involved in that to some degree. I think Gail Donna started them, and you know, it's talking about my job. I went from the ICF director, then Michael left, Sam Restivo came in. He made me the overall residential director, both ICF and group homes, for a period of time. Then Paul came in, and ultimately he created a level of staffing called the assistant executive director level. And he made me the assistant executive director of quality assurance and something rather. It's a long title, but it was over quality improvement. He wanted to initiate quality improvement strategies within the organization. So then I think Gail and I switched roles there for a while. I think she went over the residential, and I was doing quality improvement. She started the clinics also. And then somewhere we switched again where I got over the clinics, and then she took over quality improvement. I started the program, then she took it over, and I took over the clinics for whatever reason. But the beauty of the clinic program in relation to what you were talking about of creating more value of the Reese Center for the community was that an Article 28 clinic is a public health clinic. It serves everybody. So we developed it for the purpose of serving the developmentally disabled population because the local medical community at the time was not, how can I say this delicately, was not real excited about serving this population. Understand me, they're challenging medically, and there's not a lot of reimbursement in it. And we were having trouble getting people to be medical providers for our folks. We'd had, at the ICF, we had our own medical director, but for everybody else, it was the whole thing was community placement, home and community-based services. So we were being pushed to get people out into the community. Well, we couldn't get that, so we had to do it ourselves. So we, in fact, applied for and got approval to develop an Article 28 public health clinic. And I love to talk about that in the sense of we couldn't take them to the community, so we brought the community to us. And we accomplished the same thing. But I think that also allowed other people to come in to see, hey, this is good for everybody. Not only that, but we started we were the first veterans clinic in the area as well. So we had the veterans coming in. So we got to be a more of a community program for everybody, not just what people thought was developing and disabled. It was still hard to get over that general view of us, but a lot of people came to appreciate it. And I think that's still the way it's viewed today. I mean, they look at all the dental services, primary care services, OTPD speech. So it does serve the community on a much broader basis now.
At the time when we applied, I know I was part of that with applying that for that Article 20, we weren't sure we were going to get it.
Mm-hmm. I know.
And it wasn't clear what our fellow health care agencies how they were going to react to it negatively. They weren't sure. Nobody was quite sure. Mm-hmm. And I remember having some meetings with folks at various unnamed health agencies, mm-hmm. and they sort of shrugged their shoulders, thinking, one, they didn't think we'd get it, and two, it might not make a difference. And yes, you served a population which we necessarily aren't serving. We're a little embarrassed by that, but okay. Mm-hmm. But my reaction is that was such a pivotal get. Mm-hmm. And there was some politics behind all that. I mean, mm-hmm. It's a state get. And when that happened, I know there was excitement, but now, many years later, it's got to be one of the great gets for the Research Center.
Absolutely. Yep.
That I'm not sure you'd get today.
Probably not. Yep.
Yeah, so kudos on that. Do you remember any more about kind of the thought processes? Was it sort of a strategic planning meeting, or just kind of a guys that got into a room and said, oh, what the hell, let's give it a shot?
Well, there wasn't a lot of strategic planning before Paul Chisana, pretty much. I think it was developed as it was a strategy that we knew that we had no choice but to pursue, mm-hmm. Because it was getting dire. I mean, we were really struggling to get providers, mm-hmm. And we knew we had to do something, or it was going to be challenge the rest of the programs, because people needed health care, and some of the folks we served had some significant issues. So I think we said that we just have to do this. We have to make it happen, and there was an opportunity, and that's my best recollection. I know we drafted it up with a lot of. We had a pretty good rationale for it. I mean, sure. It was pretty an undeniable need for it, and I think with a lot of the politicking and whatever other things had to happen, we were successful. And it was a great get, like you said. It really was.
Did you recall going out to Albany and meeting with the folks, or who was kind of driving that bus?
I think my role was pushing it from the side of the ICFs and the residential. So I was I was pushing it on the needs basis. I think Gail Donis at the time was the one who actually was the manager, director involved in doing the application and all that stuff. So that was more Gail than me at the time, as I recall. I mean, there's so many things going on.
Well, you know, when you look at the timeline, which you did not get, you think about during this time period when you joined in 1980, psychiatric day treatment clinics, Willow Trace projects, such things as Plants and Things,
Oh, my God,
Benedict,
yeah.
Forest, Willow, the recreation center, the swimming pool, the pharmacy, independent living center, administrative offices relocated, Jamestown Expos, name changes,
you.
Governor Cuomo, Harrison Industries, all of that stuff. And this is just, I'm looking at 4 years.
Yeah,
Boom, boom, boom.
it was the golden age of services to DD. It really was. We were busy.
And for all of us to keep up with it, and I was just the legal hired gun. I was on the board. By the way, did your paths cross with John Reels? Did you work with John?
I know, I remember the name. What was his
Well,
role?
John was the, down at Jones and Gifford, he was the guy left over from Art Metal. And he sort of helped us develop that whole Jones and Gifford property. Well, maybe that was before you, I'm not sure.
Yeah, I remember the name. Didn't have much to do with him.
And as I go through this, it just brings back a lot of memories. Mike Raymond is a story unto himself. We all have our stories of Mike.
You know what that is?
But I want you to relate the story, which was perhaps the end story. Mike had died in a Caribbean island. There was a funeral set in Connecticut, and some of us decided we would go to the funeral, you being one of them.
That's correct.
So why don't you tell your recollection of that crazy
And
day?
feel free to chime in, because as I recall, you were along on that ride.
I was.
As I recall, it was yourself, Joe DiCarlo, Kate Neary, myself. I think that was it.
It may have been a fifth, and I'm struggling, but
I know.
was Bender in there?
I don't remember that.
Okay, well, let's remember that was certainly
Who
us
knows?
four, yeah.
At least four of us.
Yeah.
So, yes, it was a trying time. Michael was not with the Resource Center. He was in Connecticut at that time, was building, similar facilities in Connecticut. And he was building a home, apparently, in the Bermuda, the Bahamas, someplace. And the story is that he had a vehicle accident, was thrown from the vehicle, hit his head, passed away. And his ashes were returned to Connecticut, and a funeral was held, and that's when we decided to go. We flew to Newark Airport and rented a car to go
From Buffalo.
from Buffalo.
Yeah.
Flew from Buffalo, and rented a car at Newark Airport and drove up to Connecticut to attend a funeral. And we did. We went through that and paid our respects. And then we drove back to the Newark Airport. And lo and behold, when we got there, the whole airport was shut down. And, it was rather odd, but all we, I think, found out at the time was somehow there was a power disruption or something happened, and they shut the whole airport down. Well, we still needed to get home. So as I recall, we just kept the rent-a-car and started heading west. And this was, as I recall, it was late in the afternoon, early evening,
Early evening, yeah.
when we left New Jersey. And you were the driver for most of the journey. I think maybe Joe gave you a break or something, but you were the leader of the safari here. And quite the journey it was. We drove all night long. There, as I recall, there was hardly anything open. We were trying to find a place to get something to eat, and there was nothing open because it's pretty rural. And it was in 3 a.m. There's not much out there when you're hungry and thirsty. But we told a lot of stories and shared a lot of experiences about Mike Raymond and the Resource Center, and we laughed a lot and probably cried a little bit. But it was a memorable ride. And I don't think any of us to this day are truly convinced that Mr. Raymond actually expired in the Bahamas. We still think he's off running around the ocean with Jimmy Buffett or somebody. But that's just, that's the legacy.
Sure it is, and
That's legacy.
all that, what Clark just said is true. And it was the funniest, because you had to keep awake, frankly.
Oh, yeah.
Just because it was dark, it was dank, but God, stories, I mean, we knew we were kind of contained, there was no public, it was all pretty private. We all knew most of the stories, but not all of them.
And everybody had a unique
And everybody had their unique
Yeah.
parts of their story, I being the lawyer, Kay being the personal secretary, and then other relationships that you had, and certainly Joe had, and it was just wild. And good thing nobody was taping it at the time. But I join you in the feeling, as does Kay, rest her soul, that Mike perhaps is laughing a lot, and that came to the fore shortly thereafter. You may recall we did a eulogy service at Jamestown Community College. And I was one of the eulogists, and there were others. And all I walked out of there saying, this was filmed, and he's going to watch it. It's going to be on YouTube someday, and he's going to be laughing his butt off listening to us talk about him the way we were talking about him in such a...
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
but
He left an indelible mark on all of our lives.
Yeah, and the Resource Center, we smile now, we laugh, and yes, Mike provided some interesting, private, challenging times to all of us. Say that without getting into a lot of detail, but as with regards to the Resource Center, he was a genius.
He was. At that time, in that place, we couldn't have had anybody better to accomplish what was accomplished.
Yeah.
Yeah. Can I do something?
Sure.
We were talking about some of the things that we had accomplished, and one of the more important, I think, and feel-good things that we ever did was the Willowbrook folks, and this is something that I've had for a while, and I want to donate this to you and Steve to put in the archives of the Resource Center.
Okay, if Ed will, camera's on me, I will open it up before I hand it to Steve for the archive. It is a invitation from Governor Mario M. Cuomo and Commissioner Arthur Webb, New York State Office of Mental Retardation and Developmental Disabilities, and cordially invite you to a promise fulfilled, the ceremony marking the closing of Willowbrook, Thursday, September 17th, 1987, in Staten Island Development Center. And this was something that you specifically were invited to. Tell us about that.
Well, it was the agent, Michael, received it, and he couldn't go, and he asked if I would be the representative. But as I recall, it was canceled or something occurred. I didn't make it. Something occurred, and I can't remember what the circumstance was. But neither one of us got down there. But that was the original invitation
Wow.
that was sent.
Thank you. Well, Steve, I'll hand this to you for the archives.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
No, just saying, we were glad to be a part of that whole process. It was pretty special.
When you think about Geraldo Rivera's kind of expose and how that then rippled its way through, it took a period of time, but ultimately through Mike's vision and right place, right time, and willing to get engaged, which most people could have not done so. What a difference that has made for us. here.
Exactly. Yep.
And you were in the eye of that storm, Clark Poppleton.
Glad I was there.
This is a much better bag to get than the last bag that was handed to me.
From Bruce Piatz,
Yeah.
he told me.
Do you remember that whole incident?
A little bit, yeah.
Yeah, tell me what you remember about that.
Well, that was something between Bruce and Michael about the person who was
We mentioned Al B.
discharged.
Miller's name. I
Yeah,
just
Al B.
said,
Miller, okay. It was just one of those crazy, as we all know, Michael did not like he did not like confrontation. He'd love to hire you, but he didn't want to fire you if you had to. He would just tell you that, somebody's going to have to do his job. But anyway, I don't remember that as much as I remember the one about the person who I replaced, who was starting the ICF. And same thing, Michael became disenchanted for whatever reason, I don't know the circumstances, but he would not do the job. He had Kay Neri, his executive assistant, go up and actually tell the person face to face that they were terminated. And she did it. But that's Michael's style.
All right, now we're on Kay Neri.
Okay.
Now, Kay Neri, who clearly was Michael's administrative assistant, gatekeeper, mother hen, everything. So talk to me about Kay
Savior.
Neri.
A wonderful person, cantankerous, honest, very protective, mother bear over Michael. Kind of an exceptional executive assistant in a lot of ways. Knew everything that was going on everywhere, kept his secrets, and I'm sure she had her moments with him, and she probably let him know what she thought, but probably didn't matter much in Michael's mind. I really enjoyed Kay. We had a pretty good relationship. She was supportive and helpful to me and of me. And I could always, rely on her, give me a little insight, before I went in to talk to Mike or Paul or whoever was, in charge at the time. Just a good soul, had a great sense of fairness. But she'd let you know where she stood, pretty much. I also, after I retired, I worked for Rick for a little while, and Kay was down there. Kay would help out down there, so I got to know, or stay involved with Kay for 3 more years, I think, while I was with them after I retired, before she passed. So that was nice, and she was just always great to talk with, and we shared a lot of stories.
Just, after she retired, I'd see her at the ballpark periodically with Marie Karuba. They're a big New York Mets fan, but yeah, I had many opportunities to be with Kay, and I would call her probably once a month and just ask her if she'd heard from Mike, and of course that led to the big guffaw. Not yet, but I suspect I will. That kind of conversation that we had.
Right.
Yeah, none of us. It was that whole scenario was pretty weird, and yeah, okay. So you knew you were coming in today, And you, obviously, you even talked to Bruce Piatz, even got
Yeah,
some-
because I had no idea what to expect here.
Yeah, so what's the question I should be asking you that I haven't asked Clark Poppleton about your days at the Resource Center? Personalities, events, programs, anything, you know? You did so much over such a long period of time.
I can't think of anything. I would like to say, though, that kind of a shout out to all the staff of TRC. I mean, and I've always said that they are as special as the people they serve. And I walk around the cemetery lot for exercise. I live right near the Lakeview Cemetery on Clyde Avenue. And I was walking the other day in the lower section of the Veterans Circle down there, the new one. And I stumbled across, I look at a lot of the gravestones when I'm walking. It's just a great walk. It's good exercise. And I looked at a stone. I said, I know that name. And I stopped and I turned around and there were 5 markers in a row, all people who lived at the Resource Center, were residents of the Resource Center. I won't mention their names. I don't know if it's appropriate. But I took a picture. I can show you which ones. But there were 5 of them in a row. Nice markers. And I thought, how special. Somebody thought enough to bury them side by side. And that's the staff who do that.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Well, it's also, we did an event here called The Value of a Human Life. And your story that you just said values that, because if that had been a Willowbrook, they had died there, there would have been a pauper's grave, probably unmarked,
Yep,
not have a value, just a number.
yep,
And here they had a name on a tombstone, and you saw it.
yep.
And so here we are, I mean,
Among their friends.
Yeah.
And, I don't know if it was the same house. I have no idea if they all lived together. I know all of the names, but I thought that's so special that they thought enough
Yeah.
to do that.
well, that is something that's a tribute to the legacy of the Resource Center, which started back in the 50s. Way back when my boss, Sherry Cadwell.
Oh, yeah,
I mean, that goes that far back. And we've already talked on other occasions about my connection, but that's how long that's been, and it was the dealing with mentally challenged people, mentally retarded at the time, what they were called, Achievement Center. And the community sort of treated them as the unwashed. And that wasn't just this community, I mean, it was just generally. And here we come a long ways till now. You'll see them received at social settings, movies, restaurants, working, and,
And nobody thinks much of it.
and everything was it. And that's a long ways.
Yep. It's been a great journey.
Yeah. Well, and you've been a major part of that, Clark Poppleton.
Some part of it.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you very much. Steve, you got questions?
The one work-related question, Clark, talking about, you and Greg have been talking about, TRC was really on the cutting edge of services for people with disabilities in the 80s. I'm just wondering, can you speak to how we were perceived either by other chapters across the state, by state officials, even by, national figures in terms of where we were on the forefront of providing services?
Well, a couple things. New York State itself was always, many states were amazed at New York's ability to get dollars out of the federal government. So New York was well known for having an ability to do that. Likewise, the Resource Center, I think, was pretty much highly recognized by its peers as being able to, capture the funds to develop these extraordinary programs. I don't recall many, if any, other organizations that did as much as the Resource Center did during that heyday. And I'm sure there are some people who didn't appreciate Michael's style of dealing with those issues, or sometimes other organizations, but they all respected what he did and how he got it, or that we built these programs and did these wonderful services for people. I never felt anything else but respect from most other organizations. They may have words about certain parties or persons, but I think there was an undeniable respect for the ability of the Resource Center to do what it felt was best for the community and for the people that we served. We had to go through some of those early, the Padovan hearings, and sell it to the community. But I think that was done. The other thing, Greg, I think that's also a huge attribute for the Resource Center was the golf tournament. That was enormous with Carl Kappa, and that brought together a lot of people and a lot of positive attention to the Resource Center, and you were greatly involved in that as well. I mean, that went a long way for getting respect for the organization, and also helped build a nice foundation that supported, the efforts. And most not-for-profits these days, 501c3s, service organizations, if you don't have additional support someplace, it's tough in New York State. It's a huge challenge. So that went a long way, I think, for establishing support and respect for the organization as well. And you deserve all the credit for that, or a lot of credit for that.
Well, there was a time where, part of the interviews Steve and I did was, because the community did not know what we did, yet we were an economic engine, they just didn't appreciate it. So there was an effort on many fronts to try to get staff members out, Rotary, Kiwanis, Lions, speaking, which was not Mike. He didn't really like to do that. So it fell to other people to do that. But it was just all of a sudden a strategy of getting out there amongst them, and which then led to kind of that first thing was sort of that Jamestown Expos baseball season ticket, and that got national attention. And next to Carl Kappa, which took it way, Laurel Run, fantastic.
Yes,
Gus Macker,
Laurel Run also, that was
Gus
huge.
Macker, it was just things from a variety of sources
Gus Macker, yeah.
where you got the community engaged, and they didn't know the Resource Center, but you're out there. You're out with the public. And all of that, and you're right, even to this day, the golf tournament, they know the Resource Center really through Carl.
Yeah,
Carl's
true.
legacy, and which is a remarkable.
But those events, all of those events, like you said,
Yeah.
went a long way to adding community appreciation and respect
Right.
for the Resource Center.
And you guys have done the community parade, the Christmas parade, things like that. It's
Oh,
just
yeah.
all of a sudden.
Makes a difference, it really does, in a
really does.
small town.
Pardon? Gus Macker, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
And Clark Poppleton, my gosh, it just doesn't get any better than that. So at what point there was an aha moment where you said, I've really run a long time with the Resource Center. Was it hard to say no, to kind of retire?
Well, yeah, of course. I think when it's time, though. There were multiple factors, and most anybody's, retirement time, I would think. But I think for me, the time was right. I could have worked, I was certainly able to and capable. But I think with just, that your time, you've done what you could do while you could do it. And it was times were changing. And I think it was the right thing to do for me at the time.
You were there for about 35 years?
29.
29? It's a long run.
Yeah, I've been retired 12 years. Hard to believe.
Looks like you could work tomorrow, Steve. You have a spot? You got a slot?
Absolutely, always.
Well, this has been great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Really
I've
appreciate
enjoyed it.
I'll give you these two little things of your grandfather, a picture and the letter.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Now, let's go upstairs. I want to see what you're talking about.
Sure,
Okay.
sure.
Thanks,
Are we
everyone.
done?
Yep.
All right.
What story I want to hear, Clark?
Sure.
Is,
Thank you, Greg.
I've retold this story over the years, but I may not have all the facts right. But you've gone back to Arizona after years and kind of serendipitously ran into some friends at this gas station out in the middle of
Yeah.
nowhere, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, that's certainly not part of the history here, I don't think. But, you know, I lived in Arizona, and I had, let's see, how did I get out there? Was I on my own? I might have been at a conference or something. I think it was. And I called, you remember Linda Anderson, Greg?
Yes, I do.
Well, she married a guy named Dan Simon, and they live in Tucson. We all lived out there together at one time. Actually, Dan and I graduated from the same program at the U of A. But anyway, so I was at the conference, I think, at Phoenix or something, and I took some time to drive down because I wanted to just go to my old stomping grounds. And I drove in to Tucson, and I called Dan and Linda, and didn't get an answer. I don't know what was going on. I left a message. So then I thought, well, I'm going to drive down to Sierra Vista, which was that's where I lived when I left Arizona, and go down to Tombstone and Bisbee. I mean, a great area. And I thought, well, I'll just go see, maybe I can find my old boss or something. So I headed down there, and I decided to take the back roads, and there's a little town called Sonoyta, which is a four corners. There's a post office and a general store and maybe a restaurant, and that's it. So there's another guy who I knew growing up who played football for JHS, Ron Armella. You know Ron Armella? Yeah. He has an interesting story, too, about him. He was written up in not Life magazine, but anyway, he was written up in a national magazine for his Vietnam activity. At any rate, and he lived somewhere off on a ranch in the boondocks. And at one time, he'd been the postmaster after he came back of Sonoyta. So I didn't ever think I'd run into him. But so I stopped in Sonoyta, and I went into this little grocery store. It was just, it wasn't like a 7-Eleven, it was smaller than that. You had pop and, stuff like that. I walk in here, and I'm walking around, getting a Coca-Cola or something, and I look over, and here's Dan Simon, walking in the same store. I said, Dan. He said, Clark, what are you doing here? He hadn't gotten my message. So it was like, oh my God. He had been off, he was coming back from someplace, and he'd stopped to do a hike at a little trail down there, and he was stopping in to get some water or drink. So we walked, I said, I just left you a message. He says, what are you doing out here? So we're catching up, standing in the parking lot, car pulls up, guess who gets out of the car? Ron Armella.
Oh, my God.
Ron Armella.
All the gin joints and all the
Really, and this is a four corners in the middle of nowhere.
Oh, my gosh.
And he gets out and he goes, I don't believe this. What are you guys doing here? I said, we don't know either. It's just the stars are crossed. And we just stood there and talked for like 15, 20 minutes, caught up. I went on to Sierra Vista. He went to Tucson, and Dan went to Phoenix or whatever it was. And that was it. But I will never forget that moment in my life where three friends showed up in the same, podunk town at the same time.
That's.
Bizarre.
That is amazing.
Yeah,
I love that story.
yeah.